Montana Territory, 1887. The frontier town of Silver Creek had seen its share of hopeful souls come and go, but the small railway station had never witnessed a more forlorn figure than Zara Harper. Her chestnut brown hair tumbled in loose waves over shoulders that carried too much weight for a woman of 22. The pale blue traveling dress she wore, once fine but now creased from days of travel, did little to brighten the shadows beneath her hazel eyes. The station platform stood empty as the last train whistle faded into the distance, taking with it her final connection to the life she'd left behind. Zara clutched her small valise, containing all that remained of her former existence. In her mind, the frontier represented her last chance, a harsh, unforgiving place where she could disappear. Life had taught her a cruel lesson. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability led to devastation. Better to remain alone, especially in a land as wild and unforgiving as the Montana Territory. She'd travel onward to her uncle's homestead come morning, assuming he still lived. If not, she'd find her own way. Solitude was safer than dependency. The winds picked up as dusk approached, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Zara glanced at the darkening skies with growing unease. The station agent had locked up and departed, leaving her alone with the building's shadows and the growing chill. She'd expected her uncle's letter to arrive before her, had counted on someone waiting. Now, with night falling and no accommodations secured, the folly of her impulsive journey east became painfully apparent. "Station's closed, ma'am." The deep voice startled her, causing her to whirl around, heart pounding. A man stood at the edge of the platform, one boot propped on its wooden edge. Even in the failing light, his presence commanded attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical attire of a working cowhand, dusty denim, well-worn boots, and a Stetson pulled low over eyes the color of a summer storm. At perhaps 25, his face still held the clean lines of youth despite the day's stubble darkening his jaw. His posture suggested casual confidence, but his eyes held careful assessment. "I can see that," Zara replied, struggling to mask her unease. "I'm awaiting transportation." The cowboy glanced pointedly at the empty dirt road that served as the town's main street. "Don't see anyone coming for you." His gaze softened slightly. "You got folks expecting you?" "My uncle. He has property near Silver Creek." She lifted her chin, unwilling to display vulnerability. "There's been a misunderstanding about my arrival time. That's all." He studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "What's your uncle's name?" "Gerald Harper." The cowboy's expression changed subtly. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Ma'am, old Gerald Harper passed 3 months back. Pneumonia took him quick." The news struck Zara like a physical blow. Her uncle, her last living relative, gone. The tenuous thread connecting her to this place snapped. She swayed slightly, her hand instinctively reaching for the station bench. "I see," she managed, her voice hardly more than a whisper. "Thank you for informing me." The cowboy watched her struggle to maintain composure, respect evident in his silence. Finally, he spoke. "Name's Daniel Quinn. I work the Circle Q, my family's ranch. We're neighbors to what was Harper's place." He replaced his hat, decision apparently made. "You can't stay here alone. Town's mostly decent folk, but the mining camp's empty on Saturday nights." His voice took on a gentle firmness. "You're coming home with me," the cowboy said when he found her alone at the station. "Just until we sort things out." Zara stiffened. "That's hardly appropriate, Mr. Quinn. My mother and sisters are at the ranch," he clarified. "You'll be properly chaperoned. And it's just Daniel." "I don't accept charity from strangers," Zara replied, though her options were rapidly dwindling with the daylight. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Then consider it frontier hospitality. Out here, we look after folks. That's how survival works." He extended his hand toward her valise. "My wagon's just down the street. We can reach the Circle Q before full dark." Something in his steady gaze, not pity, but straightforward decency, broke through Zara's resistance. With reluctance born of necessity rather than trust, she allowed him to take her bag. "Just until I determine my next steps," she conceded, following him off the platform. "Of course," Daniel agreed, though something in his voice suggested he understood better than she the limited options for a woman alone in the Montana Territory. "Harper's place is still standing. We've been keeping an eye on it. As they approached a sturdy wagon, the skies opened. The sudden cloudburst seemed to cement her decision as Daniel quickly helped her onto the seat and covered her with an oilcloth before the rain could soak through her traveling clothes. "Looks like you arrived with the first spring storms," he commented as he urged the horses forward. "Been waiting on this rain for weeks." Zara remained silent, watching Silver Creek's handful of buildings recede. She'd come west seeking solitude and anonymity, convinced that emotional detachment was the only protection against life's cruelties. Now, circumstances had forced her into accepting help from this stranger, this cowboy with direct eyes and capable hands. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled east to escape dependency, only to find herself dependent within hours of arrival. As the wagon jolted along the muddy road, Zara resolved that this arrangement would be temporary. The frontier demanded self-reliance, and she would not fail that test. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, acutely aware of the rigid posture of the woman beside him. Something in her demeanor spoke of pride and pain in equal measure. The territory had seen its share of people running from something, and this woman, with her Eastern accent and quality clothing, was clearly not what she seemed. But judgment had no place in survival, and something about her quiet dignity stirred his protective instincts. The Quinn ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a substantial two-story home flanked by several outbuildings, lamplight glowing from the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the late spring evening, a welcoming beacon against the gathering darkness. "Home," Daniel said simply, guiding the team toward the house. The word struck Zara with unexpected force. Home was a concept she'd abandoned, much like hope and trust. Yet as the wagon rolled into the yard and the front door opened, spilling golden light and the silhouettes of waiting figures, she felt a treacherous flicker of longing. Margaret Quinn, a woman whose silver-streaked brown hair and weather-lined face spoke of frontier hardship endured with grace, welcomed Zara with unquestioning hospitality. Daniel's two younger sisters, Sarah, 20, and Rebecca, 17, regarded her with frank curiosity as their mother settled her by the fire with a mug of hot coffee. "Gerald Harper's niece," Margaret murmured, comprehension dawning. "He spoke of you often." "Did he?" Zara asked, surprised. Margaret nodded. "Said his brother's girl was making her way in Boston. He was proud of you." The simple statement threatened Zara's composure. She hadn't seen her uncle since childhood, their connection maintained through occasional correspondence. That he'd spoken of her, remembered her, was unexpected. The rain set in for the night. Margaret continued practically. "You'll stay here, of course, until we sort out the Harper place." Daniel, hanging his wet coat by the door, caught Zara's eye. "Told you. Frontier hospitality." His slight smile, a softening of his serious countenance, caused an unexpected flutter in Zara's chest. She quickly attributed it to exhaustion and turned her attention back to Margaret's questions about her journey. Later, settled in a small but comfortable bedroom, Zara found herself staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. The sound of rain on the roof and the occasional distant rumble of thunder punctuated the silence. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of family conversation downstairs, Daniel's deep voice occasionally rising above the others. Coming west had been an act of desperation after the final devastation of her life in Boston. Teaching positions were scarce for women with scandalous associations, regardless of how unfair those associations might be. Her reputation had been collateral damage in a wealthy man's schemes, and when she'd rejected Charles Blackburn's improper advances, his vindictive response had destroyed her standing in Boston society. Her uncle's homestead had represented escape and anonymity, not this unexpected entanglement with a family whose kindness felt like a threat to her carefully constructed defenses. Tomorrow, she would insist on seeing her uncle's property. She'd make her own way, as she'd planned. Independence was her only security in a world where trust led to betrayal. Dawn broke clear and brilliant after the night's storm, revealing the landscape that would now be her home. From the Quinn's porch, Zara caught her breath at the sweeping vista. Rolling grasslands giving way to distant mountains still capped with snow, the new spring green just beginning to soften the winter browns. The vastness spoke of possibility and peril in equal measure. "Different from Boston, I expect," Daniel commented, stepping onto the porch with two steaming mugs. He offered one to her. "Yes," Zara acknowledged, accepting the coffee. It's The description resonated with Zara's memories of her father, Gerald's brother, who had similarly kept the world at arm's length until his death 10 years prior. Perhaps that tendency ran in the Harper blood. She certainly had embraced isolation as protection against further hurt. Breakfast with the Quinn family proved a lively affair, with Daniel's sisters peppering Zara with questions about Boston fashion and society. Their mother eventually stemmed the tide of curiosity, reminding them of chores awaiting attention. "You'll have to excuse them," Margaret said as her daughters cleared the table. "We don't get many visitors from the East." "They're delightful," Zara replied honestly, finding herself warming to the straightforward affection evident in the family dynamics. Daniel rose from the table. "If you're ready, we should head to Harper's place while the day's still young." The ride took them across rolling grasslands still damp from the previous night's rain. Daniel rode a chestnut gelding with easy confidence, while Zara sat astride a gentle mare borrowed from his sister. The physical sensation of horseback riding, something she hadn't experienced since childhood visits to her uncle, returned quickly, though she suspected she would feel the unaccustomed activity in her muscles later. "There it is," Daniel said eventually, pointing to a modest homestead nestled against a hillside. "Harper's place." The cabin sat weathered but solid, with a small barn and corral beside it. A stream ran nearby, and a stand of cottonwoods provided natural shelter. Despite its simplicity, the setting held a quiet beauty that resonated with something in Zara's soul. "It's smaller than I expected," she admitted as they approached. "He was building onto it before he took ill," Daniel explained. "Had plans for a proper ranch house eventually." He glanced at her, said he was finally getting things ready for family. The word struck Zara with unexpected force. Had her uncle been preparing for her eventual arrival? Their correspondence had increased in frequency over the past year, with his last letter containing a tentative invitation she'd initially dismissed. It was only after her world collapsed that she'd reconsidered, writing to announce her imminent arrival, a letter that had evidently arrived too late. They dismounted, and Daniel unlocked the cabin door. The interior was simple but well-maintained. A main room with stone fireplace, a small bedroom partitioned off, and basic furniture crafted with skilled hands. "He made most of it himself," Daniel commented, seeing her run her fingers along the smooth wood of a table. "Gerald had a gift for working with his hands." Zara nodded, a lump forming in her throat as she took in her uncle's possessions. Books well worn from reading, a fiddle hanging on one wall, photographs carefully framed. One showed a younger version of her father and uncle, arms slung around each other's shoulders. Another featured a solemn little girl with familiar eyes, herself at perhaps 6 years old. "He kept you close," Daniel observed quietly. The simple statement breached the careful walls of Zara's composure. Tears she'd refused to shed over the collapse of her Boston life came now for the uncle she'd hardly known, but who had remembered her, prepared for her, created space for her in his life. Daniel retreated silently to the doorway, offering privacy for her grief while remaining protectively present. When her tears subsided, he spoke from the threshold. "The legal matters are straightforward. As his only living kin, the property's yours. Judge Hanson in town can confirm it, but there's no question." Zara wiped her cheeks, embarrassed by the display of emotion. "I don't know the first thing about running a homestead." "Few do when they start," he replied with a slight shrug. "You learn what you need to know." "Is that what happened with you?" "You learned what you needed to know." Something darkened in his expression. "Not quite. I was born to it, third generation on Quinland. My father believed ranching was in our blood." He paused. "But he also believed a man should stand alone, trust no one outside family. Said partnerships and friendships were weaknesses in a land this harsh." The belief echoed Zara's own conclusions about self-reliance, though hearing it articulated by someone else cast it in a different light. "And you?" she asked. "Do you share that philosophy?" Daniel considered her question with the deliberate thoughtfulness she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "I used to," he admitted finally. "Watched my father drive away potential allies with his stubborn independence. After he died, I had to unlearn some of those lessons the hard way." His gaze met hers directly. "Out here, the ones who survive alone are rare exceptions. The rest of us need each other, whether we like admitting it or not." The simple wisdom of his statement unsettled her carefully constructed worldview. Before she could formulate a response, Hoofbeats sounded outside. Daniel straightened, hand moving instinctively toward his hip where Zara noticed, for the first time, he wore a holstered revolver. "Quinn," a voice called. "That your horse out front?" Daniel relaxed slightly. "It's Tom Jensen from the next property over," he explained to Zara before raising his voice. "In here, Tom." A lean man in his 30s appeared in the doorway, his expression registering surprise at Zara's presence. "Didn't know you had company." "This is Miss Zara Harper, Gerald's niece from back east," Daniel explained. "Miss Harper, Tom Jensen runs the J Bar spread to the north." Jensen tipped his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, sorry about your uncle. He was a good neighbor." "Thank you," Zara replied, noting the man's restless demeanor. "Something wrong, Tom?" Daniel asked, obviously perceiving the same tension. Jensen glanced between them. "Cattle gone missing from my north pasture. Found tracks this morning. Looks like they're being driven toward Devil's Canyon. 3 riders, based on the sign." Daniel's expression darkened. "Larson's men. Can't prove it yet," Jensen replied grimly. "But who else would be fool enough to rustle in daylight?" "How many head?" 15, maybe 20. Daniel nodded once. Decision made. "I'll ride with you. We can catch them before they reach the canyon if we push." Jensen's relief was palpable. "Appreciate it. I've got Davis and Mackenzie meeting us at the fork." Zara watched the exchange with growing concern, sensing the undercurrents of danger. "What's happening?" she asked when Jensen stepped outside to check his horse. "Cattle rustlers," Daniel explained, buckling his gun belt more securely. "They've been hitting isolated spreads for months. The territorial marshals spread too thin to help much." He hesitated. "I need to ride with Jensen. Rustlers can turn desperate when cornered, and he shouldn't face them with just 2 hands." "Of course," Zara said, although apprehension twisted in her stomach. This stark reminder of frontier danger threw her situation into sharp relief. She was truly alone in unfamiliar territory. Reading her expression, Daniel made a quick decision. "I'll take you back to the ranch first." "No," Zara interrupted, drawing on unexpected resolve. "This is my home now. I'll stay here." Daniel studied her, conflict evident in his eyes. "It's not safe for you to be alone until we know who's operating in the area." "I'm not helpless, Mr. Quinn," she insisted, though the bravado felt hollow even to her own ears. His expression softened. "I never suggested you were. But even the strongest among us needs safe harbor sometimes." He glanced toward the waiting Jensen. "Come back with me now. Once this business is settled, I'll help you properly set up here if that's still what you want." Something in his direct gaze, concern without condescension, eroded Zara's resistance. The cabin, though symbolically important, suddenly felt oppressively empty. The thought of spending her first night in this unfamiliar territory alone, with dangerous men potentially nearby, tested the limits of her commitment to self-reliance. "Very well," she conceded. "But I will return. This is my inheritance, and I intend to honor it." Daniel's expression relaxed into the ghost of a smile that seemed to illuminate his features. "I believe you will, Miss Harper. You have the look of someone who follows through on their word." The unexpected compliment, delivered with simple sincerity, caught Zara off guard. She found herself wanting to live up to his assessment, though she immediately chastised herself for caring about a virtual stranger's opinion. The ride back to the Quinn ranch passed quickly, with Daniel explaining to Jensen who Zara was and why she was at Harper's place. The neighbor's respectful treatment further convinced Zara that her uncle had been well regarded in the community, a discovery that both comforted and saddened her. Margaret Quinn received her return without surprise, as if she'd expected Daniel wouldn't leave Zara alone at the isolated cabin. "You're welcome here as long as needed," she assured Zara, though her eyes betrayed concern for her son as he prepared to ride after the rustlers. "Be careful," she told Daniel as he checked his rifle. "Victor Larson doesn't play by any rules." "Neither do I when it comes to thieves," Daniel replied, though he softened the statement with a reassuring smile for his mother. To Zara, he added, "I'll return by nightfall if possible. If not, don't worry. It just means we're tracking farther than expected." The simple instruction, "Don't worry," seemed impossible to follow as Zara watched him ride away with Jensen, their figures gradually diminishing against the vast landscape. She barely knew this man, yet the thought of him facing armed criminals filled her with unexpected dread. "He knows what he's doing," Margaret said quietly, standing beside her. Been handling ranch troubles since he was 17, when his father passed. That seems very young to shoulder such responsibility, Zara commented. Margaret's expression grew distant. The territory doesn't much care about age, only capability. Daniel grew up fast, maybe too fast. She looked at Zara directly. His father believed in standing alone against the world. Taught my son that needing others was weakness. Took years and some hard lessons for Daniel to unlearn that poison. The parallel to Zara's own philosophy was uncomfortably obvious. She changed the subject. Is there something I might do to be useful while I'm in your home? I'm not accustomed to idleness. Margaret's expression warmed. We're preparing for spring planting in the kitchen garden. An extra pair of hands would be welcome. The afternoon passed in productive labor alongside Daniel's sisters, whose cheerful conversation gradually drew Zara out of her shell. Their uncomplicated acceptance, so different from the calculated social interactions of Boston, proved surprisingly restorative. By the time they finished the garden work, Zara found herself laughing at Rebecca's theatrical recounting of a school recital disaster, her earlier anxiety temporarily forgotten. As dusk approached with no sign of Daniel or the other men, however, Zara's worry returned. Margaret maintained a calm demeanor, but Zara noticed her increasingly frequent glances toward the window as she prepared dinner. Should we be concerned? Zara finally asked when the last daylight faded. Not yet, Margaret replied, though tension lined her face. The canyon's a good distance. If they had to track the rustlers all the way in, they might wait until morning to return. The explanation was reasonable, but something in Margaret's tone suggested greater concern than her words admitted. Zara helped set the table for a meal none of them had much appetite for, the absence of Daniel's presence conspicuous in the family dynamic. The sound of approaching horses near midnight brought them all to their feet. Margaret reached the door first, opening it to reveal Daniel dismounting wearily in the yard. Relief surged through Zara at the sight of him, dirty and exhausted, but apparently unharmed. His expression, however, was grim as he entered the house. Blood stained one sleeve, though he quickly assured his mother it wasn't his own. Mackenzie took a bullet, he explained tersely. We got him to Doc Spencer in town. He'll live, but it was close. The rustlers? Margaret asked, already moving to heat water. 2 got away. We caught the third, one of Larson's ranch hands, as expected. Daniel removed his hat, running a hand through hair damp with sweat. Sheriff's holding him, but he won't talk. We recovered most of Jensen's cattle. His gaze finally found Zara, standing uncertainly near the kitchen doorway. Something in his expression softened. Sorry to bring this trouble to your doorstep your first day here. You've nothing to apologize for, she responded, surprised by the depth of her relief at his safe return. Is there anything I can do? You could pour him some coffee while I see to that arm, Margaret suggested, returning with a basin and medical supplies. It's just a graze, Daniel protested, though he allowed his mother to help remove his jacket, revealing a torn shirt and a shallow furrow along his upper arm. Bullet or branch? Margaret asked clinically, examining the wound. Branch, he admitted. Wasn't watching where I was riding during the chase. While Margaret cleaned and bandaged the injury, Zara brought coffee and found herself studying Daniel's profile. The day's events had revealed dimensions to him she hadn't anticipated. His sense of community responsibility, his competence in crisis, his matter-of-fact courage. These qualities contradicted her assumptions about the self-interested nature of people, assumptions that had calcified during her Boston downfall. Later, with the household finally settled for the night, Zara found sleep elusive. The day's experiences swirled in her mind. Her uncle's cabin with its evidence of his regard for her, the Quinn family's unquestioning acceptance, the harsh realities of frontier life illustrated by the rustlers' violence. And through it all, Daniel Quinn's steady presence, challenging her convictions about self-reliance with his own example of community interdependence. She'd come west believing isolation was her only protection against further hurt. Now, surrounded by people whose concept of survival included mutual support rather than solitary fortification, that belief faced its first serious challenge. Spring unfurled across the Montana landscape with startling speed. 2 weeks after her arrival, Zara found herself settling into an unexpected routine. Each morning, she rode with Daniel to her uncle's property, where they worked steadily to prepare the homestead for her eventual occupation. Afternoons often found her assisting Margaret and the girls with household tasks at the Quinn Ranch, where she continued to stay despite her initial determination to establish immediate independence. The delay in moving to her uncle's cabin was practical. The roof needed repairs, the winter abandoned garden required extensive work, and the property needed livestock that Daniel was helping her acquire. But Zara privately acknowledged that her reluctance wasn't entirely practical. The Quinn home had begun to feel comfortable in ways she'd never anticipated. "You've got a natural hand with plants," Daniel observed as they finished setting out vegetable seedlings in her uncle's newly turned garden soil. The spring sun warmed the air, bringing out golden highlights in his hair and deepening the tan on his face and forearms. "My mother kept a small garden when I was young," Zara explained, tamping soil around a tomato plant. "I'd forgotten how satisfying it is to work with growing things." "What did you do in Boston?" Daniel asked, straightening from his crouched position. "You've never said." Zara hesitated, the question brushing against wounds still tender. "I taught at a girls' school. Literature and composition. Is that something you might continue here? Silver Creek's growing. They've been looking for qualified teachers." The suggestion startled her. She'd assumed her teaching career had ended with her reputation in Boston. "I hadn't considered it. Do you think they would hire a stranger?" Daniel's expression warmed. "You're hardly a stranger anymore. Gerald Harper's niece, staying with the respected Quinn family? That's practically local credentials." He paused, studying her. "Unless you're set on ranching full-time?" "I'm not certain what I'm set on," she admitted, surprising herself with the candor. Coming west was a necessity rather than a plan. Daniel nodded, asking no further questions, though curiosity clearly lingered in his eyes. His restraint, the space he consistently gave her emotions, was unlike anything she'd experienced in Boston society, where personal information became currency in social exchanges. "Whatever you decide," he said finally, "you have options here. That's the thing about the territory. It cares more about what you can do than who you were before." The simple statement offered more comfort than elaborate reassurances might have. As they gathered their tools to return to the Quinn Ranch for the evening, Zara found herself studying Daniel's profile when he wasn't looking. In 2 short weeks, he'd become a constant in her new life, reliable, straightforward, and increasingly important to her sense of security. The realization was unsettling. Dependency of any kind contradicted her hard-won conviction that self-reliance was her only protection. Yet Daniel never positioned himself as someone she should depend upon, merely as someone who existed alongside her, offering assistance as naturally as breathing. Their rides back to the Quinn Ranch had become Zara's favorite part of each day, moments of quiet conversation against the backdrop of magnificent landscape. Today, however, Daniel seemed preoccupied, his usual attentiveness muted by some internal concern. "Is something troubling you?" Zara finally asked as they crossed the halfway point to the ranch. Daniel glanced at her, looking momentarily surprised by her perception. "Just thinking about Larson," he admitted. "The rustling was bad enough, but now he's pushing boundaries in other ways." "How so?" "His men have been following the creek upstream onto Quinn land, claiming water rights that don't exist in any territorial record." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yesterday they drove 50 head into our south pasture and threatened one of our hands when he tried to move them back." The tension in his voice conveyed the seriousness of the situation more than his words alone. "Is that common here? Such disputes?" "Not like this," Daniel replied grimly. "Neighbors have disagreements, but Larson's different. He came up from Wyoming 2 years ago with money no one can account for and ambitions to build the biggest spread in the territory. Doesn't much care whose land he has to take to do it. Surely there are laws. Laws require enforcement." Daniel interrupted, a rare edge entering his voice. "The territorial marshal visits maybe twice a year. The local sheriff's a good man, but has 3 deputies to cover hundreds of square miles." His expression softened at her concern. "I'm sorry. You didn't come west for these troubles." "Neither did you," Zara pointed out. "Yet here you are, facing them." Something shifted in Daniel's gaze, a recognition or appreciation she couldn't. "So you say?" Reeves's gaze shifted to Zara with an appraisal that made her skin crawl. "Don't believe we've met the lady. Miss Harper is Gerald Harper's niece," Daniel said, subtly positioning his horse to partially block the man's view of Zara. "She's taken over his property." Interest sharpened in Reeves's expression. "That's so? Harper Place has good water access. Mr. Larson's been looking to expand in that direction. The property isn't for sale, Zara stated firmly, determined not to be spoken about as if absent. Reeves's smile widened unpleasantly. Everything's for sale for the right price, ma'am. Or under the right circumstances. The implied threat hung in the air. Daniel's hand drifted casually toward his sidearm, a movement not lost on the other riders. Miss Harper is under Quinn protection, Daniel said, his voice deceptively mild though Zara could see tension radiating through his shoulders. I suggest you convey that information to your employer. Reeves held Daniel's gaze for a long moment before shrugging with elaborate casualness. Just being neighborly, sharing Mr. Larson's interest. He touched his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy. Ma'am. Quinn. With a nod to his companions, he guided his horse around them, deliberately forcing Daniel to draw his mount aside. Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding as the men rode away. Are they always so pleasant? Daniel's grim expression relaxed slightly at her dry tone. Reeves is Larson's foreman. Mean as they come, but usually more subtle. He glanced at her with concern. I'm sorry you had to experience that. It's hardly your fault, Zara replied, though unease lingered from the encounter. What did he mean about my uncle's water access? Daniel sighed. Harper Creek runs through your property before joining with larger waterways. In dry years, control of that water becomes valuable. He hesitated. Larson's been systematically acquiring properties with water rights throughout the valley. Those who won't sell have faced difficulties. The implications settled like a weight on Zara's shoulders. She'd come west seeking escape from one set of problems, only to find herself embroiled in another. Yet the threat felt different here, open rather than hidden behind social niceties, and somehow less insidious for its directness. I won't be intimidated, she said firmly. My uncle built that homestead. I won't surrender it to threats. Daniel studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, certainly, but something deeper that made her heart beat faster. The Harpers clearly breed stubborn, he said finally, a smile warming his eyes. Your uncle would be proud. His approval shouldn't have mattered, yet Zara found herself warmed by it as they resumed their journey. The encounter had revealed another layer of frontier reality, the ongoing negotiations of power and resources that shaped life in the territory. But it had also confirmed something else. In coming west, she'd traded the subtle social dangers of Boston for more direct threats. Strangely, she preferred the latter. At least here, she could see her adversaries clearly. News of their encounter with Larson's men spread quickly through the Quinn household. Margaret's concern was evident in her increased vigilance, while Daniel consulted with his ranch hands about strengthening patrols of their boundaries. The tangible response to potential danger contrasted sharply with the helplessness Zara had experienced in Boston, where social threats operated through whispers and closed doors rather than direct confrontation. That evening, as Zara helped clear the dinner table, Daniel's youngest sister Rebecca approached her with characteristic directness. Are you scared of Larson's men? The 17-year-old asked, blue eyes serious beneath curls the same golden brown as her brother's. Zara considered the question honestly. Wary, but not frightened, she decided. In Boston, I learned that showing fear often encourages those who wish to intimidate. Rebecca nodded sagely. Daniel says the same thing about wolves. Show them your back running, and they'll chase you down. Stand your ground. They'll usually find easier prey. Your brother seems to have considerable experience standing his ground, Zara observed. Something like pride mixed with worry crossed Rebecca's young face. Since Pa died, he's carried everything. Ma worries he'll end up the same way, standing alone until something breaks him. The simple assessment carried surprising insight. Zara had noticed Daniel's tendency to position himself between others and danger, physically with Larson's men today, metaphorically in his community responsibilities. She recognized the pattern because she'd observed its consequences in her own father, whose solitary stoicism had eventually hardened into isolation. Your brother doesn't strike me as someone who would break easily, Zara offered, wanting to comfort the girl. Rebecca's expression lightened. No, he's too stubborn for that. She glanced toward where Daniel sat discussing ranch matters with one of his hands. He's different since you arrived, though. Less closed up. Before Zara could formulate a response to this startling observation, Sarah called for Rebecca's assistance with evening chores. Left alone with her thoughts, Zara found herself watching Daniel across the room, seeing him through his sister's perspective. There was something fundamentally reliable about him that transcended his physical capability. An integrity that showed in small actions. The way he listened fully when others spoke, how he considered his words before using them, his habit of checking on family members with brief touches of reassurance. These qualities, more than his undeniable physical appeal, had begun to undermine Zara's carefully constructed defenses. As if sensing her attention, Daniel glanced up, meeting her gaze across the room. The moment of connection, quiet, undemanding, sent warmth through Zara's chest. She looked away first, unsettled by her reaction. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had cost her everything once before. She couldn't risk repeating that mistake, especially not in a place where her very survival might depend on maintaining clear judgment. Yet as she readied for bed that night, Zara admitted a discomforting truth. Somewhere between the train station and this moment, Daniel Quinn had become important to her. The realization was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. The following week brought a flurry of activity as Silver Creek prepared for its annual spring festival, a tradition that brought scattered ranch families together for rare socializing. Despite her inclination toward privacy, Zara found herself drawn into preparations through Margaret and the girls' enthusiasm. "You'll need something suitable to wear," Margaret declared 3 days before the event, assessing Zara's limited wardrobe with practical concern. "The festival includes dancing." "Dancing?" Zara echoed, alarmed at the prospect of such public display. "Nothing formal like you're probably used to," Sarah reassured her. "Just a fiddle band and enough space cleared in the meeting house for couples to move around without trampling each other." The casual description did little to quell Zara's apprehension. In Boston, social dancing had operated under rigid protocols that protected participants through formality. The prospect of a more informal frontier gathering, where she knew few people and understood fewer customs, awakened her social anxieties. "I'm not certain I should attend," she hedged. "There's still so much work at the cabin." "Nonsense," Margaret interrupted kindly but firmly. "Everyone will expect to meet Gerald Harper's niece. Besides, the whole point of the festival is to take one day away from endless work." She studied Zara thoughtfully. "Sarah's blue dress might be altered to fit you with minimal adjustments." Before Zara could formulate further objections, the Quinn women had incorporated her into their preparations with good-natured determination. Their easy inclusion, the way they simply assumed she belonged in their activities, gradually wore down her resistance. By the morning of the festival, she found herself actually anticipating the event with cautious curiosity. The town of Silver Creek had transformed itself for the occasion. Bunting decorated the main street buildings, food tables lined the central square, and the meeting house had been cleared for dancing. Families arrived throughout the morning, creating a gathering larger than Zara had realized the area could support. "Most folks come from within 30 miles, Daniel explained as he helped her down from the wagon that had brought the Quinn family to town. "Some travel farther. It's the one time of year certain families see each other." He looked different today, Zara realized. He'd exchanged his work clothes for clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. The transformation from working rancher to something approaching an Eastern gentleman's appearance was striking, though his easy physicality remained unmistakably frontier. "You look nice," he said, the simple compliment catching her off guard. His gaze took in Sarah's altered dress, which fit Zara better than expected, emphasizing her slender waist and bringing out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. "Thank you," she replied, feeling unaccountably shy. "Your mother and sisters worked miracles with limited materials." "The materials weren't the impressive part," he answered with a directness that warmed her cheeks before he was called away by a group of men gathering near the sheriff's office. Left with Margaret and the girls, Zara was gradually introduced to what seemed like the entire community. Names and faces blurred together, though she noted the genuine welcome extended by most. Her status as Gerald Harper's "I'm managing quite well, thank you," Zara replied, noting how others nearby had subtly withdrawn, creating a bubble of space around their conversation. "I'm sure you are," Larson agreed with manufactured sincerity. "However, should you find the burden excessive, I'd be happy to discuss purchasing the property. I could offer a fair price, enough to establish you comfortably elsewhere. The offer, though politely framed, carried the same underlying threat Zara had sensed from his foreman. The property isn't for sale, Mr. Larson. Not now, not in the future. Something hardened in his expression. Everyone has a price, Miss Harper. Or a breaking point. He glanced meaningfully toward where Daniel stood across the room, deep in conversation with the sheriff. I've observed you've formed quite an attachment to the Quinn family. Admirable people, if somewhat overextended in their commitments. The veiled threat against Daniel and his family sent a chill through Zara despite the warm evening. I believe this conversation is concluded, Mr. Larson. For now, he agreed smoothly. But do consider my offer. The territory can be dangerous for those without proper protection. With a slight bow, he moved away, immediately engaged by other festival attendees who seemed eager for his attention. Zara remained where she stood, processing the encounter with growing anger. Larson's tactics reminded her uncomfortably of Charles Blackburn's manipulations in Boston. The same combination of social charm and underlying menace. The same assumption that persistence would eventually wear down resistance. You look like you could use some air. Daniel's voice startled her from her thoughts. He had approached without her noticing, concern evident in his expression. I just met Victor Larson, she explained as they moved toward the meeting house doors. Daniel's jaw tightened. I saw. What did he want? To buy my uncle's land. When I declined, he suggested I might reconsider when facing sufficient pressure. She hesitated. He also implied threats against your family. The evening air cooled her flushed face as they stepped onto the meeting house porch. Daniel guided her to a quieter corner before responding. Larson's used to getting his way, he said finally. Money buys influence even out here. But he's overreaching now. Too many properties targeted, too many threats made. People are starting to push back. Including you? Zara asked, studying his profile in the lantern light. Daniel met her gaze directly. I'll defend what's mine, and those under my protection. The simple declaration carried absolute certainty. In that moment, Zara realized the fundamental difference between the men she'd known in Boston and Daniel Quinn. Eastern society had trained its men in calculating self-interest disguised as gallantry. Daniel's protective instinct came from somewhere deeper, an unshakable core value rather than social performance. The fiddle music swelled inside, drawing their attention back to the festivities. Daniel offered his hand in a gesture both courtly and somehow entirely natural. Dance with me. The invitation held no pressure, just quiet hope. Zara placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work, the careful strength in his grip. I should warn you, Boston dancing may not translate well to frontier customs. His smile transformed his serious features. I'll risk it if you will. The dance was a simple pattern compared to formal Boston cotillions, but required more physical connection than Zara had anticipated. Daniel's hand at her waist guided her through unfamiliar steps with gentle confidence, his touch respectful, yet warm through the fabric of her borrowed dress. The physical proximity, his chest occasionally brushing hers during turns, his breath near her ear when he murmured directions, created a dizzying awareness she couldn't attribute solely to the energetic movement. You're a quick learner, he observed as they completed a complicated turn without faltering. You're a patient teacher, she countered, breathless from more than exertion. His gaze held hers for a suspended moment before the dance pattern separated them again. When they reconnected, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of mutual awareness that neither voiced but both recognized. They danced 3 consecutive sets before Margaret claimed Daniel for a mother-son tradition. Watching them move across the floor, his tall form bending attentively to his mother's instructions, their easy laughter visible even from a distance, Zara felt a pang of longing for the family connection she'd never truly experienced. He's a good man, Emily Davis commented, appearing beside Zara with 2 cups of punch. She offered one, which Zara accepted gratefully. One of the few who never tries to explain my job to me or suggest I'd be better off married than teaching. He seems to respect competence regardless of its source, Zara agreed, appreciating the straightforward conversation after an evening of navigating social currents. Emily nodded. The Quinn men have always been respected, but Daniel's different from his father. Old Quinn believed in standing apart. Daniel believes in standing together. She glanced at Zara with friendly assessment. He looks at you differently than I've seen him look at anyone. The observation, delivered without jealousy or agenda, caught Zara off guard. We've only known each other a few weeks, she demurred. Emily smiled. Out here, we don't have the luxury of lengthy courtships. Life's too uncertain, too demanding. She shrugged. When you find someone worth keeping, you recognize it quickly. Before Zara could formulate a response to this frontier wisdom, commotion near the meeting house entrance drew their attention. Raised voices preceded the appearance of Reeves, Larson's foreman, flanked by two other men Zara recognized from their previous encounter on the trail. All three appeared to have been drinking heavily. "Where's Quinn?" Reeves demanded, his voice carrying over the momentarily silenced music. His hostile gaze swept the room until it landed on Daniel, who had moved protectively in front of his mother. "There's the man who thinks he runs this valley." The sheriff stepped forward, one hand raised in a calming gesture. "Take it outside, Reeves. This isn't the place." Reeves ignored him, focusing on Daniel with drunken intensity. "Your friend Jensen accused the wrong men of rustling. Larson wants satisfaction. Jensen identified one of your hands with stolen cattle." Daniel replied evenly. "If Larson has concerns, he can raise them through proper channels." "Proper channels," Reeves mimicked with exaggerated contempt. "Listen to him talk like some Eastern gentleman." His gaze shifted, finding Zara in the crowd. "Is that what you're trying to impress, Quinn? Harper's fancy niece?" Daniel's expression hardened, though his voice remained controlled. "You're drunk, Reeves. Go home before you do something you'll regret." "Already regretting letting you strut around like you own everything and everyone." Reeves spat, his hand dropping to his holstered gun. "Maybe it's time someone taught you." The sheriff moved with unexpected speed for his age, positioning himself between the men. "That's enough. I'm ordering you off the property, Reeves. All three of you now." For a tense moment, Reeves seemed poised to escalate the confrontation. Then Victor Larson himself appeared in the doorway, his expression coldly furious. "Reeves, outside, immediately." The command carried absolute authority. Reeves hesitated only briefly before complying, though his glare promised future retribution as he and his companions withdrew. Larson turned to the assembled crowd with practiced charm. "My sincere apologies for the interruption. Good help is so difficult to find in the territory." His gaze found Daniel across the room, the cordial smile never reaching his eyes. "No harm done. I trust Quinn." "This time," Daniel replied, the two words carrying clear warning. Larson acknowledged this with a slight nod before departing, leaving a wake of whispered conversations. The fiddle band, after an uncertain pause, resumed playing, though the earlier festive atmosphere had diminished. Zara made her way to Daniel's side, noting the tension still evident in his posture. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he answered shortly, then sighed at her concerned expression. "Sorry." Reeves was hoping to provoke a confrontation. If he'd succeeded, there would have been violence, Zara finished, understanding dawning. "He wanted you to draw on him." Daniel nodded grimly. "With Larson's other men as witnesses, claiming self-defense when they returned fire." He glanced toward his family, now gathered near the refreshment table. "I need to get them home. This evening's taken a turn." The Quinn wagon departed Silver Creek shortly thereafter, the earlier celebratory mood replaced by watchful silence. Daniel drove with one hand, his other resting near his holstered revolver as they traveled the dark road toward home. Margaret and the girls spoke quietly among themselves, while Zara found herself scanning the shadowed landscape with new awareness of potential threats. "I'm sorry your first festival ended this way," Daniel said softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "None of it was your doing," Zara replied, equally quiet. "Does Larson truly have such influence that his men believe they can act with impunity?" Daniel's expression was grim in the moonlight. "Money buys a certain kind of power, but he's miscalculated how far he can push before the community pushes back." He glanced at her. "I'd feel better if you reconsidered staying at your uncle's place until this situation resolves." The suggestion awakened Zara's instinctive resistance to perceived control. "I won't be driven from my inheritance by threats. It's not about the property." Daniel studied her profile for a long moment before a reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "You really are Gerald Harper's niece, aren't you?" He used to say almost exactly that. "Perhaps it runs in the family," Zara suggested, returning his smile despite the tension of the evening. Stubbornness certainly does, he agreed, though the teasing held clear admiration. After a pause, he added more seriously, "At least let me assign one of our hands to stay at your place when you do move in, just until we know Larson's next move." The compromise seemed reasonable, though Zara noted how naturally Daniel had assumed responsibility for her welfare. In Boston, such presumption would have chafed against her independence. Here, with darkness surrounding their slow journey and the evening's threats fresh in memory, his protective instinct felt like shelter rather than constraint. "I'll consider it," she conceded, earning another of his rare, transformative smiles. The wagon rolled onward through the Montana night, the vast star-scattered sky a reminder of both vulnerability and possibility. Zara found herself drawing closer to Daniel's solid warmth as the temperature dropped, their shoulders touching with each movement of the vehicle. Neither acknowledged the contact, yet neither moved away. The confrontation at the festival marked a turning point in the territory's uneasy equilibrium. Over the following days, reports filtered in of increased activity at the Double L Ranch. Men coming and going at odd hours, larger than usual supply purchases in town. Daniel increased patrols of Quinn boundaries while quietly coordinating with neighboring ranchers to establish mutual defense arrangements. Despite the brewing tension, work continued on preparing the Harper homestead for Zara's occupancy. The roof was repaired, furniture arranged, and essential supplies stocked. Daniel secured a milk cow and several chickens from neighbors willing to part with surplus stock, while Margaret contributed seedlings from her own garden to supplement what Zara had planted. A tentative move-in date was set for the following week, weather permitting. Though she'd never admit it aloud, Zara found herself experiencing conflicting emotions about leaving the Quinn household. The family's warmth had breached defenses she hadn't realized were permeable, creating connections that would be more difficult to sever than she'd anticipated. Most complicated were her evolving feelings toward Daniel. Their daily work together had established a partnership based on mutual respect that increasingly included moments of personal revelation. During breaks from labor, conversation had gradually shifted from practical matters to more personal territory. Childhood memories, books they'd read, hopes for the future. Each disclosure built understanding. Each shared laugh or moment of quiet appreciation deepening a connection Zara had neither sought nor expected. 3 days before her planned relocation, Zara rode with Daniel to check creek levels near the boundary between Quinn and Harper land. Spring runoff had increased water flow, requiring monitoring of key crossing points. The day was perfect, clear skies, moderate temperature, wildflowers beginning to dip the grasslands with color. "Your uncle loved this valley in spring," Daniel commented as they paused to rest the horses on a hilltop overlooking both properties. "Said it was when the land showed its true promise." Zara surveyed the vista with growing appreciation. The months since her arrival had changed her perception of the landscape. What had initially seemed intimidatingly vast now felt expansive in a liberating way. The territory's very openness had begun to heal something in her spirit that Boston's confining social structures had damaged. "I'm beginning to understand why," she admitted. "There's a honesty to this place. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." Daniel nodded, understanding in his expression. "That's what drew my grandfather here," said back east. A man had to navigate too many invisible boundaries. Out here, the boundaries might be life or death, but at least you could see them clearly. The observation resonated with Zara's own experience. "I think that's why I found it easier to breathe here, despite everything." In Boston, danger wore polite smiles and extended hands in apparent friendship while wielding knives behind their backs. Even Larson's threats feel almost refreshingly direct by comparison. Daniel turned to study her, curiosity evident in his expression. She'd rarely referenced her reasons for leaving Boston, maintaining privacy around what had driven her west. Something in the peaceful moment, however, made the prospect of disclosure less threatening. "What happened in Boston?" he asked quietly, the question lacking any hint of entitlement to her confidences. Zara watched a hawk circling overhead, gathering her thoughts. "I taught at a prestigious girls' school. The headmaster's brother-in-law, a wealthy businessman named Charles, began paying particular attention to my classes, ostensibly out of educational interest." She smiled humorlessly. His actual interest became clear when he cornered me alone and made improper advances. Daniel's expression darkened, though he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. When I refused him, he claimed I had encouraged his attention and then sought to extort money for my silence. She exhaled slowly, the memory still carrying sting despite the distance. Given his social position versus mine, whose story do you suppose was believed? Yours wasn't, Daniel surmised, anger evident in his controlled tone. Zara nodded. I was asked to resign for the good of the school. References were withdrawn. Other teaching positions mysteriously became unavailable after initial interest. Charles had extensive business connections throughout Boston society. She met Daniel's gaze directly. I didn't leave Boston. I was effectively exiled from it. Because you wouldn't submit to a powerful man's demands, Daniel stated, comprehension dawning in his expression. Because I believed in my own worth, Zara corrected gently, and discovered that belief was insufficient currency in a world where women's value is determined by men's assessment. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. When he finally spoke, his voice held controlled fury on her behalf. No wonder you came west believing self-reliance was your only protection. Boston taught you that depending on others meant vulnerability to their judgment or control. His understanding, the way he immediately grasped the connection between her experience and her subsequent philosophy, touched Zara deeply. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed someone to comprehend the logic of her defensive posture rather than simply try to dismantle it. Yes, she acknowledged, though I'm beginning to think the lesson may have been too absolute. Daniel's expression softened. How so? Since arriving here, I've experienced a different kind of community than I knew in Boston, Zara explained, finding her way through the realization as she spoke. Your family, neighbors like the Jensens, even Emily Davis, none have demanded conformity to their expectations as the price of acceptance. The support offered comes without the implicit control I experienced in Eastern society. A smile warmed Daniel's eyes. The territory has fewer people to spare. Makes us value each one for what they bring rather than how well they fit preconceptions. Is that why you've never pressed me to be anything other than exactly what I am? Zara asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider its implications. Daniel's gaze held her steadily. I pressed the land to yield crops, animals to submit to direction, and adversaries to respect boundaries. But people, he shook his head, people need space to become their truest selves. Pressing only creates resistance or fragile compliance, neither worth having. The wisdom in his statement, so different from the controlling benevolence of Boston's social arbiters, reinforced what Zara had been slowly recognizing. Daniel Quinn represented not just a different kind of man than she'd known before, but a different conception of relationship altogether. One based on mutual support rather than dominance and submission, on partnership rather than hierarchy. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her evolving feelings, a distant sound caught Daniel's attention. He straightened in the saddle, scanning the valley below with sudden alertness. Riders, he said tersely, coming fast from the direction of your uncle's place. Concern immediately replaced their contemplative mood. Daniel urged his horse forward, Zara following as they descended from their vantage point toward the oncoming riders. As the figures grew clearer, Zara recognized Tom Jensen and one of the Quinn ranch hands, both pushing their mounts hard. Daniel, Jensen called as they approached. Smoke at Harper's place. The words sent icy fear through Zara's veins. Daniel immediately wheeled his horse. How bad? Just starting when we spotted it, Jensen replied grimly. Wilson's gathering men from your place. We rode to find you. Without hesitation, Daniel turned to Zara. Stay with Jensen. He'll take you back to the ranch. No, Zara countered firmly. It's my property. I'm coming. Daniel looked ready to argue, but must have recognized the futility in her expression. With a curt nod, he addressed the group. We'll approach from the west. If it's Larson's men, they may still be there. The four riders set a punishing pace across the valley floor. As they drew nearer to the Harper homestead, dark smoke became visible rising above the tree line. Zara's heart pounded with each hoofbeat, fear for her inheritance warring with anger at the violation. The "we" registered clearly, not a presumption but a statement of fact. Despite her fierce independence, Zara found herself grateful for the unquestioned alliance it represented. What do you suggest? Daniel surveyed the damaged homestead. The cabin needs at least a week of repairs before it's habitable. Until then, you stay at the ranch. When she began to protest, he raised a hand. Not negotiable, Zara. Even the most self-reliant need shelter while rebuilding their walls. The gentle challenge in his words, addressing her philosophy directly, diffused her automatic resistance. Very well, she conceded. But I'll be here every day working alongside whoever helps with repairs. I'd expect nothing less, Daniel replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips despite the grim circumstances. As the men secured the site before departing, Zara stood in what remained of her uncle's garden. The newly planted seedlings had survived the day's chaos, their tender stems reaching towards sunlight despite the char and ash surrounding them. Their resilience struck her as a fitting metaphor for her own situation, damaged but not destroyed, still seeking growth despite adverse conditions. Ready? Daniel asked, approaching with their horses. Zara nodded, taking a final look at the homestead. He won't win, she said quietly. Daniel's hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, a simple touch conveying solidarity. No, he agreed. He won't. The ride back to the Quinn ranch passed mostly in tired silence, the day's exertions having drained both physical and emotional resources. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch buildings, Daniel spoke unexpectedly. I realized something today, he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. What's that? Zara asked, curious despite her exhaustion. My father believed a man must stand alone to be strong, Daniel replied, his voice thoughtful. But watching everyone work together to save your place, I saw more strength in our combined effort than any single person could have managed alone. Zara considered his words, finding parallel insights to her own evolving understanding. Perhaps true strength isn't found in isolation but in knowing when to stand alone and when to stand together. Daniel turned to look at her fully, something profound in his expression. Exactly. The simple affirmation felt momentous, a shared revelation that challenged both their inherited beliefs about self-reliance and vulnerability. As they continued toward the ranch, Zara felt a subtle shift in her perception of Daniel. He wasn't simply a man who had helped her navigate frontier challenges. He was becoming a partner in questioning fundamental assumptions about how to exist in the world. The implications of this evolution both thrilled and terrified her. News of the fire at Harper's homestead spread quickly through the surrounding community. The following morning brought a steady stream of neighbors to the Quinn ranch, offering assistance with rebuilding. By mid-morning, wagons loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies formed a small caravan ready to begin repairs. I can't accept such generosity, Zara protested to Margaret as they watched the preparations from the porch. I have no way to repay everyone. Margaret smiled knowingly. That's not how things work here. When the Pedersens lost their barn to lightning last fall, Gerald Harper was first to help rebuild. When Tom Jensen's wife had a difficult childbirth, 3 neighboring women ran their household for weeks. We help because someday we'll need help ourselves. The concept, so different from Boston's calculated social exchanges, still challenged Zara's understanding of community. Yet as she watched Daniel organizing the work crews with quiet efficiency, she recognized that the offered assistance wasn't charity, but mutual investment in collective survival. At the homestead, the day unfolded in a remarkable display of cooperative effort. Men cleared debris and erected scaffolding, while women set up an outdoor kitchen to feed the workers. Children carried water and ran messages between groups. By sundown, the barn's charred remains had been cleared and foundation laid for a new structure, while the cabin's damaged roof section had been removed in preparation for rebuilding. Throughout the day, Zara worked alongside everyone else, learning to handle tools, carrying materials, serving food when needed. No one questioned her participation or suggested more feminine tasks might be appropriate. The frontier's practicality erased gender distinctions in crisis. Capable hands were valued regardless of who they belonged to. You've earned some respect today, Daniel commented as they paused for water late in the afternoon. His shirt was darkened with sweat, his forearms streaked with dirt and sawdust. Not everyone expected a Boston-educated woman to work like you have. Boston education doesn't preclude physical capability, Zara replied, though pleasure at his acknowledgement warmed her despite her exhaustion. Besides, this is my home. Why wouldn't I help rebuild it? Daniel's expression softened. It's good to hear you call it home. Means you're putting down roots. I suppose I am, Zara realized, surprised by how natural the concept felt now. 3 months ago, the Montana Territory had represented desperate escape. Now, despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges she'd faced, it was becoming a place of genuine attachment. Quinn. The call came from the perimeter where Tom Jensen had been keeping watch. Riders approaching from the east. Daniel immediately straightened, his relaxed demeanor shifting to alertness. How many? 6, maybe 7. Jensen called back. Moving slow, not trying to hide. The work crews paused. Men reaching for weapons kept nearby throughout the day. Daniel gave quick, quiet instructions that positioned armed ranchers strategically around the property while sending women and children toward the cabin's relative safety. Stay inside, he told Zara firmly. This is my property, she countered. I should, please, Daniel interrupted, his expression intense. If it's Larson's men, I need to focus on them, not worry about your safety. The admission, his explicit acknowledgement that her welfare affected his ability to function, momentarily silenced Zara's objections. With reluctant nod, she retreated to the cabin's doorway, though she refused to go completely inside despite Margaret's concerned urging. The approaching riders appeared on the eastern ridge, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. As Jensen had reported, they made no attempt at concealment, maintaining a steady pace toward the homestead. As they drew closer, Zara recognized Victor Larson at their center, flanked by Reeves and other men she'd seen at the festival. Daniel moved to the center of the yard, positioning himself between the approaching group and the homestead buildings. Several neighboring ranchers joined him, creating a visible defensive line. The tension was palpable as Larson's group reined to a stop at a careful distance. Quite the gathering, Quinn, Larson called, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. I hadn't realized Harper's place was hosting a social event. Just neighbors helping neighbors, Daniel replied evenly. Something you might not recognize. Larson's smile didn't reach his eyes. On the contrary, I understand the concept perfectly. In fact, I've come to offer assistance myself. He gestured at the damaged structures. I heard about the unfortunate fire. A terrible accident. Wasn't an accident, Jensen called from nearby. Tracks led straight back to Double L land. Larson's expression registered practiced concern. Troubling if true. Perhaps it was poachers or drifters using my property as a convenient escape route. He shifted his attention to the cabin where Zara stood watching. Miss Harper, I'm relieved to see you weren't harmed in the incident. Daniel took a step forward, blocking Larson's line of sight, to Zara. State your business and move on, Larson. We have work to finish before dark. Something dangerous flickered in Larson's eyes at the direct challenge. My business is with Miss Harper, not you, Quinn. My offer to purchase this property stands at a premium now, considering recent events have likely demonstrated the challenges of frontier life for a woman alone. Mr. Larson, Zara called, moving forward despite Daniel's earlier request. She stopped at Daniel's side, meeting Larson's cold gaze directly. Let me be absolutely clear. I will not sell this property to you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Each threat or act of intimidation only strengthens my resolve to remain. Murmurs of approval came from the assembled neighbors, several men shifting to stand more prominently beside Daniel and Zara. The show of solidarity clearly registered with Larson, whose calculating gaze swept the group before returning to Zara. Admirable spirit, Miss Harper, he acknowledged with cold assessment. But spirit alone won't protect your property, or those who help you. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Daniel. Quinn's family has already lost one patriarch. Tragic how dangerous ranch work can be. The implicit threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Daniel's hand moved fractionally closer to his holstered weapon, though his voice remained steady. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Larson. Care to make it clearer for the witnesses present? Merely an observation about frontier realities, Larson replied smoothly. Speaking of which, his attention returned to Zara. While your resolve is commendable, practical considerations remain. This property requires significant investment to recover from recent damage. The Territorial Bank might be after your men threatened Quinn at the festival. Morris countered skeptically. After your foreman was seen near Harper Land yesterday? That timing concerns me, Larson. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Larson's confident facade. His gaze moved between the sheriff, the assembled neighbors, and finally to Daniel and Zara standing united. I see the welcome has worn thin, he observed, gathering his reins. Consider my offer open, Miss Harper. Circumstances change, often unexpectedly. With a nod to his men, he wheeled his horse and departed, the group maintaining a controlled pace that suggested retreat without acknowledging defeat. No one spoke until the riders disappeared over the eastern ridge. Then Sheriff Morris turned to Daniel with a grimace. He's growing bolder. That was as close to an open threat as I've heard him make. But still nothing you can arrest him for, Daniel surmised. Morris nodded grimly. Not yet, but he's getting careless. Men like Larson eventually overreach. He turned to Zara. Miss Harper, I'd advise caution in the coming weeks. Don't travel alone. Keep weapons handy. I'll ensure she's protected, Daniel stated with quiet certainty. The sheriff studied them both with knowing assessment. I expect you will. To the gathered workers, he called. The show's over, folks. Let's get back to building before we lose the light. As activity resumed around the homestead, Zara remained beside Daniel, processing the confrontation's implications. He won't stop, she said quietly. No, Daniel agreed. But neither will we. The simple declaration, the natural inclusion of himself in her defense, crystallized something Zara had been gradually recognizing. Daniel Quinn had become essential to her sense of belonging in this new life. Not because she needed his protection, but because his steadfast presence represented the community connection she'd never truly experienced before. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Daniel's gaze held hers with unexpected intensity. For what? For showing me that independence doesn't have to mean isolation, Zara replied honestly. That accepting help doesn't always create dangerous dependency. Something profound moved in his expression. For a moment, Zara thought he might say more, or perhaps do more, the tension between them suddenly charged with unspoken possibility. Then someone called his name from the construction site, breaking the moment. We should get back to work, Daniel said, though reluctance colored his tone. There's still much to do before dark. Zara nodded, though something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended their practical alliance. As they rejoined the rebuilding effort, she found herself hyper-aware of his movements around the worksite, her body seemingly attuned to his proximity in ways she couldn't quite understand or control. By the time the work crews departed for the evening, with plans to return the following day, Zara had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Somewhere between the train station and this moment, she had developed feelings for Daniel Quinn that extended far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, opening possibilities for connection she'd thought forever closed while awakening fears of vulnerability she'd believed overcome. Rebuilding efforts continued throughout the week, the community's response to Larson's intimidation manifesting in accelerated progress on both barn and cabin. By week's end, the roof was repaired, damaged walls replaced, and the new barn structure nearly complete. What might have taken months of solitary effort had been accomplished through collective action in days. Throughout the process, Zara found herself working frequently alongside Daniel, their partnership deepening through shared labor and purpose. She observed how naturally he led without dominating, how consistently he valued others' contributions regardless of status or gender. These qualities, so different from the controlling authority figures she'd known in Boston, confirmed her growing admiration even as they challenged her lingering fears of dependency. On the final day of major construction, as the last roof shingles were secured and the barn doors hung, the mood at the homestead was celebratory despite the circumstances that had necessitated the work. Margaret organized an impromptu gathering, with food contributed by participating families creating a feast that turned the work site into a social event. The cabin will be habitable by tomorrow, Daniel informed Zara as they stood slightly apart from the festivities, surveying the restored property in the golden late afternoon light. Furniture needs returning and supplies restocking, but structurally everything's sound. I can hardly believe what's been accomplished, Zara admitted, emotion tightening her throat. In Boston, I would have faced this crisis alone. Here, She gestured toward the gathered community. Daniel nodded, understanding her unspoken recognition. Here we survive by standing together. The simple truth, so contrary to her earlier belief in isolation as protection, resonated deeply. Zara turned to face Daniel fully, finding words suddenly difficult. I don't know how to properly thank you. You don't need to, he replied, his gaze holding hers with quiet intensity. This is what neighbors do. Is that all we are? The question escaped before Zara could reconsider its implications. Neighbors. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, caution giving way to carefully contained hope. What would you like us to be? The directness of his response, typical of his straightforward nature, both unnerved and exhilarated her. Before she could formulate an answer, however, Sarah approached with news that several guests were preparing to depart, requiring their attention as hosts. The interrupted moment lingered between them throughout the evening as the gathering gradually dispersed. By sunset, only the Quinn family remained, helping with final preparations for Zara's return to the homestead the following day. When the others moved inside to organize kitchen supplies, Daniel and Zara found themselves alone on the porch, watching darkness settle across the valley. Will you be comfortable here? Daniel asked, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. After everything that's happened? Zara considered the question honestly. I'll be cautious, but not fearful. This is my home now. I won't let Larson's threats diminish that. Daniel nodded, pride evident in his expression. You've shown remarkable strength since arriving. Not everyone adapts so well to frontier life. I've had exceptional guidance, Zara acknowledged, glancing at him with a small smile. And perhaps something to prove to myself. What's that? She considered how to articulate the transformation she'd experienced. In Boston, circumstances made me a victim, someone whose fate was determined by others' actions and judgments. Here, despite greater physical dangers, I've reclaimed agency. She gestured toward the rebuilt structures. Even destruction has become opportunity for renewal. Daniel studied her in the fading light, his expression thoughtful. You've changed since that first day at the train station. For the better, I hope? You were remarkable then, he said with surprising intensity. You're extraordinary now. The simple compliment, delivered with characteristic directness, caught Zara off guard, warmth spreading through her chest. Daniel. Before she could continue, movement at the property's edge caught their attention, a horse and rider approaching from the direction of the Quinn ranch. As the figure drew closer, they recognized Wilson, one of Daniel's most trusted hands. Mr. Quinn, he called urgently, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. Fire at the south pasture. The line shack's burning, and the cattle are scattered. Daniel straightened immediately, alarm replacing the warmth in his expression. How bad? Flames visible from the main house, Wilson reported grimly. Your mother sent me to find you while she organized the men. Zara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Another strike from Larson while attention focused on the Harper homestead. Daniel clearly reached the same conclusion, his expression hardening. I need to go, he told Zara, already moving toward his horse. Wilson will stay with you and your place tonight. No, Zara countered firmly. He should go with you. You'll need every hand available. I won't leave you unprotected, Daniel insisted. I'm not helpless, Zara reminded him. You've ensured that. She gestured toward the shotgun and revolver now kept in the cabin, with which Daniel had patiently taught her to shoot over recent weeks. Go. Save your ranch. I'll be fine for one night. Conflict played across Daniel's features, responsibility to his family warring with concern for her safety. Finally, practicality won. Lock everything. Keep the shotgun loaded and nearby. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, fire 3 shots and someone will come from Jensen's place. I will, Zara promised. Now go. His hesitation lasted only a moment longer before decision crystallized. In a movement that startled them both with its spontaneity, Daniel stepped forward and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. Be safe, he murmured against her hair before releasing her and striding toward his horse. Zara watched the two riders depart at a gallop, the unexpected physical contact leaving her momentarily breathless. Daniel had never initiated such personal connection before, the propriety that governed their interactions despite growing closeness maintaining careful boundaries until this. Inside the cabin, Zara lit lamps and built a small fire against the spring night's chill. Despite her brave assurances to Daniel, awareness of her vulnerability pressed in with the darkness. The rebuilt walls, while solid, felt suddenly insufficient protection against whatever Larson might attempt next. To occupy her mind, she began organizing the kitchen supplies Margaret had helped inventory earlier. The mundane task provided distraction from anxious speculation about events at the Quinn ranch and her own exposed position. When that was complete, she turned to arranging books salvaged from smoke damage onto newly built shelves, her uncle's collection integrated with volumes she'd brought from Boston. The sound came shortly before midnight, a horse's soft whinny from the darkness beyond the cabin. Zara froze, listening intently. The animals in the newly constructed barn had settled hours earlier, their occasional movements familiar background noise. This sound came from further away, near the property's edge. Moving silently to the window, Zara peered into the moonlit yard. Nothing moved within her limited field of vision. The shotgun stood propped beside the door where she'd placed it earlier, within easy reach but not immediately visible to anyone entering. Before she could cross to retrieve it, another sound registered, footsteps on the porch, too deliberate for wild animals. Heart pounding, Zara calculated the distance to the weapon, weighing options against limited information. If Larson's men had come, there might be several of them. The 3 warning shots Daniel had suggested would bring help too late if immediate violence was intended. The door handle turned slowly, testing rather than forcing. Zara had locked it hours earlier, the solid barrier holding against the attempt. A pause followed, then a knock. Not the aggressive pounding she expected from intruders, but 3 measured taps. "Miss Harper." A woman's voice, taut with controlled fear. "Please, I need help." Zara approached cautiously, positioning herself beside the door rather than directly in front of it. "Who's there?" "Emily Davis," came the response, the schoolteacher Zara had met at the festival. "I'm alone and injured. Please." Concern warred with caution in Zara's mind. Emily had been friendly during their limited interactions, but her appearance here, alone at night, defied logical explanation. "What are you doing at my property at this hour?" A pause, then, returning from the Murphy farm, tutoring their son. "Took the creek trail as a shortcut. My horse spooked at something and threw me." The voice wavered slightly. "I think my ankle's broken. Saw your light." The explanation was plausible enough. The Murphy property lay several miles north, and the creek trail did pass near Harper land. Still, caution prevailed. Zara retrieved the shotgun before approaching the door. "I'm opening the door," she called, "but I'm armed. Stand back." After ensuring the shotgun was properly positioned, Zara unlocked and partially opened the door, keeping most of her body shielded behind the solid wood. The porch stood empty, no sign of Emily or anyone else visible in the immediate vicinity. Confusion registered first, then alarm as understanding dawned too late. The distraction had served its purpose, keeping her attention focused forward while someone else entered from behind. Before Zara could turn or raise the weapon, rough hands seized her from behind, one clamping over her mouth to prevent screaming while the other wrenched the shotgun from her grasp. "Quiet now," a male voice growled in her ear. "We just need to have a conversation." Terror and fury surged in equal measure as Zara was dragged backward into the cabin's main room. Her assailant, whom she couldn't see but could smell the whiskey and tobacco on his breath, kept her restrained while 2 other men entered through the front door. With sickening recognition, she identified Reeves, Larson's foreman, accompanied by another man she'd seen at the Double L. "Evening, Miss Harper," Reeves greeted with mock politeness. "Sorry about the deception, but we figured you might not welcome us otherwise." Zara struggled against her captor's grip, earning a painful tightening of his hold. When she attempted to bite the hand covering her mouth, the man cursed and roughly spun her around, delivering a stinging slap that momentarily disoriented her. "That's enough, Baker," Reeves snapped. Mr. Larson was specific, no unnecessary damage. The man, Baker, scowled but released his grip on Zara's face, though he maintained a painful hold on her arms. "She tried to bite me. Can't say I blame her," Reeves replied with cold amusement. To Zara, he continued, "Mr. Larson sends his apologies for not coming personally. The situation at Quinn Ranch required his oversight." The implication sent icy fear through Zara's veins. What have you done? Nothing permanent. Yet, Reeves examined the cabin with casual interest. Nice reconstruction work. Shame if something happened to it again. His gaze returned to Zara, all pretense of civility evaporating. Larson's patience is gone, woman. Quinn's occupied elsewhere. Your neighbors are helping him. There's no one coming to interrupt our conversation. What do you want? Zara demanded, forcing strength into her voice despite her terror. Same as always. This property. Reeves nodded to the third man, who produced papers from inside his coat. Sale agreement. You sign, we leave. You refuse. He shrugged expressively. Baker here gets creative with persuasion methods. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Zara assessed her situation with brutal clarity. Physically overpowered, help too distant to arrive in time. Facing men clearly prepared for violence. Yet surrendering meant more than losing property. It meant allowing intimidation to succeed, violating every principle she'd come to value since arriving in Montana. I won't sign, she stated, her voice steadier than she felt. Larson can't intimidate me into submission any more than Charles Blackburn could in Boston. Something shifted in Reeves's expression at her defiance. Brave words from someone in your position. He gestured to Baker. Show her what happens to people who defy Larson. Baker's grip tightened painfully on Zara's arms, his intention clear in his expression. She braced for violence, determined not to show fear even as her heart pounded with it. Before the blow could fall, however, the cabin door burst open with explosive force. Daniel Quinn stood in the doorway, rifle leveled at Reeves's chest, his expression transformed by cold fury. Take your hands off her, he ordered, his voice deadly quiet. Now. Baker hesitated, clearly calculating odds. Behind Daniel, two more figures appeared, Tom Jensen and Sheriff Morris, both similarly armed. Do what he says, Baker, Sheriff Morris commanded. You're already facing kidnapping and assault charges. Don't add resistance to the list. For a tense moment, the tableau held. Larson's men frozen in surprise, Daniel's unwavering aim promising immediate consequences for wrong movement. Then Baker released Zara, stepping back with deliberate slowness. This is private business, Reeves protested, though uncertainty had replaced his earlier confidence. We're here at Miss Harper's invitation to discuss property sale. At midnight. With force, the sheriff's skepticism dripped acid. Miss Harper, would you care to confirm that version of events? Relief made Zara's knees weak as she moved toward Daniel, whose gaze never left the armed men even as he shifted to accommodate her beside him. They forced entry and restrained me, she confirmed steadily. Threatened violence if I wouldn't sign property documents. Morris nodded grimly. That's what I figured. To Larson's men, he ordered. Weapons on the floor. Slowly, compliance came reluctantly but inevitably, the men recognizing their disadvantaged position. As Jensen and Morris secured the prisoners, Daniel finally lowered his rifle, turning to Zara with naked concern. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough with contained emotion. No, she assured him, though she unconsciously touched her cheek where Baker's blow had landed. Daniel's gaze followed the movement, his expression darkening when he noted the developing bruise. He hit you. I'm all right, Zara insisted, more concerned with his presence than her minor injury. How did you know to come back? The fire was a distraction, smaller than reported, easily contained, Daniel explained, his gaze never leaving her face. Too convenient, coming right after we finished rebuilding here. I had a feeling. He didn't complete the thought, but his meaning was clear. You saved me, Zara said simply, the reality of how differently the night might have ended settling over her. Daniel's expression softened slightly. I came back to you. There's a difference. The distinction resonated deeply, not rescue implying helplessness, but return suggesting partnership. Before Zara could respond, Sheriff Morris approached, having secured the prisoners for transport. We'll take these men to town, he informed them. I'll need statements from both of you tomorrow, but it can wait until morning. He studied them with knowing assessment. Quinn, I assume you'll be staying here tonight? After what's happened, Miss Harper shouldn't be alone. I'll stay, Daniel confirmed without hesitation. When the sheriff and Jensen departed with their prisoners, the cabin suddenly felt quiet, the earlier violence replaced by tentative calm. Daniel secured the damaged door as best he could before turning to Zara, who But you weren't too late, Zara assured him, finding unexpected strength in the aftermath of fear. You came back. That's what matters. Daniel's hand rose to carefully touch her injured cheek, the gentleness of his fingers contrasting sharply with Baker's earlier violence. I should have been here. Should have recognized Larson would target you while the ranch was threatened. You can't be everywhere, Zara countered softly. And I'm not your responsibility. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, resolve replacing uncertainty. What if I want you to be? The quiet question hung between them, its implications unmistakable. Zara found herself at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated reaching so soon. The choice between continued independence and the vulnerable connection she'd been both drawn to and feared since arriving in Montana. Daniel, she began, uncertainty making her voice waver. I know it's soon, he interrupted gently. I know you came west seeking freedom from exactly this kind of entanglement. But tonight made something clear that I've been feeling for weeks. His gaze held her steadily. I care for you, Zara. Not as a neighbor or friend, but as a man cares for a woman he hopes to build a life with. The directness of his declaration, so typical of him, so different from the calculated courtships of Boston, left no room for misinterpretation. Zara found herself equally compelled to match his honesty. I care for you too, she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. But I'm afraid. Of what? Of losing myself in dependency, Zara explained, voicing her deepest fear. In Boston, I learned that relying on others meant vulnerability to their judgment or betrayal. Even here, with different circumstances, Daniel considered her words thoughtfully. Do you feel diminished when we work together on your land? When we share tasks that neither could complete alone? No, Zara acknowledged. That feels like partnership, not dependency. That's all I'm offering, Daniel said simply. Partnership in all things. Not control, not ownership, shared strength. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've seen you stand against Larson and his men. Anyone who thinks you could be controlled doesn't know you at all. The observation, recognizing her strength rather than seeking to protect her from her own capabilities, touched something fundamental in Zara's understanding. Throughout her time in Montana, Daniel had consistently supported without smothering, assisted without assuming control, respected her autonomy while offering alliance. The partnership he described wasn't theoretical. They'd been building it since that first day at the train station. The realization broke through her final reservations. With deliberate movement, Zara closed the small distance between them, her hand rising to rest against his chest. Partnership in all things sounds remarkably like a proposal, Daniel Quinn. His smile transformed his features, hope brightening his eyes. Maybe it is. Would that be unwelcome? No, Zara answered honestly. Unexpected so soon. Perhaps, but not unwelcome. Daniel's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. The territory doesn't much care about conventional timelines. Only what's true between people. And what's true between us? Zara asked, though she already knew her own answer. That I love you, Daniel stated with characteristic directness. That I want to build a life with you, whether on Quinn land, Harper land, or somewhere new altogether. That I believe we're stronger together than either could be alone. The declaration, simple, profound, and utterly sincere, dissolved the last of Zara's hesitation. Rising slightly on her toes, she closed the final distance between them, her lips meeting his in answer more eloquent than words. Daniel's response was carefully restrained at first, as if allowing her to set boundaries. When her arms wound around his neck, however, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of long-contained feelings finally finding expression. His hands remained respectfully at her waist, though the intensity of his embrace conveyed desire tempered by consideration. When they finally separated, breathless and a little dazed, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? He asked, a hint of uncertainty beneath his smile. Yes, Zara confirmed, the single syllable containing multitudes of meaning. To partnership, to building something together, to discovering what we can become when neither stands alone. Daniel's smile blazed with joy as he lifted her briefly off her feet in an exuberant embrace. Setting her down carefully, his expression grew more serious. Larson won't give up easily, even with his men in custody. The fight isn't over. I know, Zara acknowledged. But we'll face it together, along with whatever else the territory brings. The certainty in her voice reflected the transformation she'd undergone since arriving in Montana. The woman who had stepped off the train believing isolation was her only protection had discovered a different kind of strength, one found in mutual support rather than solitary fortification. Daniel Quinn had shown her that vulnerability, when shared with the right person, could become foundation rather than weakness. The following weeks brought significant changes to Silver Creek and surrounding properties. Sheriff Morris's arrest of Larson's men created ripples throughout the territory, emboldening other victims of intimidation to come forward with evidence of Double L's illegal activities. When territorial marshals finally arrived to investigate mounting complaints, they discovered documentation linking Larson to wanted criminals in Wyoming and financial fraud in Colorado. Victor Larson himself attempted to flee the territory when warrants were issued, only to be apprehended at the Idaho border with falsified papers and substantial cash. His subsequent imprisonment effectively ended the threat to both Quinn and Harper lands, though the legal proceedings would continue for months. For Zara, these dramatic events unfolded against the backdrop of more personal transformations. Her engagement to Daniel Quinn was announced formally 3 weeks after the night of Larson's men's arrest, though few expressed surprise at the development. The couple's growing attachment had been apparent to most community members long before they acknowledged it themselves. The practical questions of property and living arrangements were resolved with characteristic frontier pragmatism. The natural creek boundary between Quinn and Harper lands would be maintained, but bridges, both literal and figurative, would connect the properties into a unified operation. Daniel's mother and sisters welcomed the arrangement enthusiastically, particularly when Emily Davis accepted Sarah's invitation to room with her while teaching at the expanded Silver Creek School, where Zara would join the faculty for literature instruction 3 days weekly. Wedding preparations proceeded with the same community involvement that had characterized the homestead rebuilding. Margaret coordinated with neighboring women to create a celebration befitting the union of 2 respected families, while Daniel and his ranch hands constructed additional rooms on the main Quinn house to accommodate the couple until they determined their permanent residence. On the evening before their wedding, Daniel and Zara found themselves at the Harper homestead, completing final arrangements before focus shifted to ceremony preparations. The property had fully recovered from Larson's attack, the new barn housing livestock acquired through neighbors' contributions and trading. The garden Zara had planted now flourished in the summer sunshine, promising abundant harvest in coming months. Hard to believe how much has changed since spring, Daniel observed as they stood on the porch, watching sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. When I found you at that train station, I never imagined we'd be here. Zara leaned against his side, his arms settling naturally around her shoulders. What did you imagine when you saw me there? Daniel considered the question thoughtfully. Honestly, I saw someone who needed temporary shelter, someone passing through who'd soon continue their journey. He smiled down at her. I didn't realize you were actually coming home. The observation struck Zara with its profound accuracy. I didn't know it either, she admitted. I thought I was fleeing to anywhere that wasn't Boston. Instead, I was finding where I truly belonged. With me? Daniel asked, the teasing question containing genuine vulnerability. With you, Zara confirmed, turning within his embrace to face him fully. But also with myself, the self I couldn't become in Boston because there wasn't space for a woman to define her own boundaries. She gestured toward the valley. The territory demanded strength I didn't know I possessed, but it also provided freedom to discover it. Daniel nodded, understanding in his expression. The frontier strips away pretense, shows people as they truly are, for better or worse. In your case, decidedly better, Zara observed with a smile, rising on her toes to brush a kiss against his lips. When she settled back, she added more seriously, thank you for showing me that independence and connection aren't mutually exclusive, that the strongest bonds are those that allow both people to stand as individuals while choosing to stand together. Daniel's expression softened with emotion rarely displayed so openly. Tomorrow, when you become my wife, I'll promise that again before witnesses, that our marriage will be partnership in all things, strengthening rather than diminishing either of us. The commitment, so different from traditional wedding vows with their emphasis on female submission, reinforced Zara's certainty in their shared future. What had begun as desperate flight from eastern